Winning Blueprint presents.
In the L.A.B room. Oakland Raiders.
We find ourselves back on the L.A.B follow-up installment talking about the Oakland Raiders. They are no longer the Oakland Raiders. They are just the Oakland Raiders. And they need to get back to being the Oakland Raiders. That nasty, grimy team that no one wants to face in the AFC West. A team that strikes fear in your heart. They were starting to get back to that. They were starting to resemble a team that was getting that identity back under the Cable guy. Tom Cable had this team running the football, smash mouth football. They were downhill. You knew what you were getting week in and week out. They were starting to score points. The defense was starting to wake up. They weren't good, but they were starting to wake up. You could see this Raider team. The light bulb was starting to come on. And then all of a sudden, Al Davis had to stick his hand in there one last time. Blew that thing up. Hugh Jackson came in. That was a mess. They cleared house. And that's what the Raiders ultimately needed to do. After Al Davis passed on, they needed to start over. The stench of Al Davis and everything that he had done to really cripple this franchise was still lingering. They needed to clear out the room, fumigate, start over. And so that's what they did. Last year they hired a new GM, Reggie McKenzie, from the Green Bay Packers. They hired Dennis Allen, one of the coordinators out of Denver. And they said, we're going to start this thing fresh. And that's what they needed to do. That's your first step when you're a franchise looking to start over. You need to start with the foundation, your GM and your head coach. And that's what they did. Now you have that. Now you need personnel. And so they went out and they tried to get personnel. The only problem is the Raiders don't have any picks. The Raiders don't have any money. How do you get personnel if you don't have any picks and you don't have any money? You can't. That's how it works in the National Football League. You either acquire players through free agency or through the draft. You either have money and you can go out and get sought after free agents, or you have draft picks and you can pick guys and put them on your roster, pick guys who fit what you're trying to do, and build your team that way. The Raiders have neither of them, so they had to just get whatever they could for as cheap as they could and field a team. And that's why you were getting the 4-12 Raiders that you got in 2012. They weren't a good team. There's no talent on this team. And Reggie McKenzie, he's in charge of that. And it's going to take time. And so I was afraid because I'm starting to hear Al Davis' son chirping off at the mouth talking about how he was disappointed in the season. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. This is an operation that's going to take time. This is a process. And I don't know what he was looking to have happen. I don't know if he thought this was an overnight transformation or not, but you don't just get a coach and a GM and they just come in and things just instantly turn around. Not when you're the Raiders. Not when you've been as bad as they have for a decade. Things don't just turn around. You have to build this thing into a winner from the ground up. And they don't have any talent. And so Reggie McKenzie, Dennis Allen, and that group are going to have to assemble talent brick by brick by brick by brick. Reggie McKenzie really wants to turn this into the Green Bay Raiders. He'd love to bring in as many ex-Packers as he can. He tried it with Pat Lee and some other guys. It didn't always pan out, but he'd love to bring over some of the guys from Green Bay, which is not uncommon for a GM or a coach when they leave from another team to bring some guys over from where he came from. He's familiar with them. He knows what he's going to get out of them, and so he likes to bring guys along. It's not uncommon. But I tell you what, the Raiders starting to get draft picks. They finally have a first-round pick. It seems like an eternity since the last time the Raiders had a first-round pick. They have a first-round pick. They're starting to save their picks. Reggie McKenzie has already come out and said, we're not going to trade away our picks anymore. Those days are over. That's a great sign if you're a Raiders fan. That's the one thing you wanted to hear right off the bat. Stop giving away the future. Because we're not good now, so you don't need to be giving away the future as if we have it that way. So that's a good start. Save your draft picks. Money, you're going to have to start cutting ties with guys that are making too much money. The Tommy Kellys, the Richard Seymours, guys that are really eating up cap space, that are veterans. You gotta do away with those guys. And I think that's what the Raiders will do in this offseason. We'll free up some money, give them some space, some leeway to go after guys. The Raiders need a number one receiver in the worst way. Greg Jennings, an ex-Packer, will be on the market when this season is over. I don't think the Packers will give him the type of money that he feels like he deserves. Randall Cobb's emergence, makes Greg Jennings expendable. And who do you think will be one of the suitors beating down his door? None other than the Oakland Raiders. Will they have enough money? Will Greg Jennings want to go to Oakland? Will he want to reunite with Reggie McKenzie? Who knows? I don't know the answer to that. But I tell you what, if you are the Oakland Raiders, that is one free agent that should be high on your priority list. Because you don't have a number one receiver in Oakland. You have a bunch of twos, a plethora of threes, no number one. 2 twos, 3 threes don't equal to a number one. You can't put a bunch of number 2, a bunch of number 3 receivers on the field and hope that that equals a number one, because it doesn't work that way. You need a number one. You need a legit number one receiver. If Raiders could do that, it would put everyone in their right slots. Maybe this offense could get underway. Because I think Carson Palmer is a solid choice at the quarterback position. He's not bad, but I tell you what, he's 33 years old. How much longer is Carson Palmer going to be your future? You need to start looking for that next guy who's waiting in the wings. So when you have another one of these 5-11, 4-12, 6-10 stinkers, at the end of the season, that guy can get some work. And I don't think that guy's Terrell Pryor either. Maybe he is. Maybe in practice, Terrell Pryor is really playing good football, and maybe they're impressed with what they see. I wasn't that impressed with Terrell Pryor in that last game against the Chargers to end the season. Wasn't overly impressed. I thought the offense was very vanilla. I thought everything was dumbed down and simplified for him. That's fine, but you can't do that all the time in the National Football League. And so we'll see. We will see what the Raiders decide to do with that quarterback position, because honestly, I don't feel like that is a position of need right now. I don't feel like that's something that you have to act on at this very moment. I don't feel like the quarterback position is in imminent need of change. And so you have these draft picks, you have money to spend. I don't think that the quarterback position, you have so many other pressing needs on this team. I don't think that quarterback is something you really need to be focusing in on right now anyway. So be interesting to see what they do with that quarterback position. But I think there are so many pressing issues that the Raiders need to address that I don't think you can worry about the quarterback position. Mainly that wide receiver position. You really have a lot of stuff at receiver right now. A lot of it doesn't stay healthy anyway, and none of them are number one receivers. So you need to try to address that. Get you a number one, a bona fide number one receiver. I think you also need to find some pass rush. The Raiders don't get enough pressure on the quarterback. As a group, they're not bad. They had 27 sacks this season. That's not terrible. That's not great either. You want to find your way to at least 30 sacks in a season. And right now, they don't have a guy that gets you 8.5, 9, 10 sacks a season. They don't have that guy on the roster right now, so they need to find some pass rush. Also, the Raiders, they don't have a lot of talent. But again, that goes back to not having any salary cap space and flexibility, and that also goes back to not having any draft picks. There's not a lot of guys that you can just look at on this roster and say, we need to build around this guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy. There's not a lot of those. There are a few players that you can pull from this roster and say, these are guys that we can start a foundation with. You know, but that's part of the reason why they decided to make a change with the coordinator position. The Raiders let go of their special teams coordinator, their offensive line coach, and their linebackers coach. The most prominent of them, though, was the offensive coordinator, Greg Knapp. He was let go. He was relieved of his duties, and really for one reason, because he's a zone blocking guy. That's his scheme. That's what he's known for. zone blocking. He was known in Atlanta mainly for zone blocking. That's what Greg Knapp does. He was in San Francisco. He was in Atlanta. He was a zone blocking guy. That's what he's known for, and that's exactly why the Raiders brought him on, because Dennis Allen wanted to run the zone blocking scheme. Again, Dennis Allen came from Denver. That's what they run in Denver. So he was familiar with zone blocking. He wanted a guy that was going to be able to coach it up and have it run in Oakland. It did not work. Their best player, in my eyes, Darren McFadden, he's not a zone blocking scheme type of running back. He's a downhill masher. He's a guy that wants to take it and go straight ahead as fast as he can. He doesn't change directions very well. He's not a Arian Foster where he sticks his foot in the ground, makes a sharp cut, and goes. He's not a guy that can make sharp cuts. His cuts are rounded. They look like U's. They don't look like V's. That's why Darren McFadden doesn't fit in a zone run blocking scheme, and so something had to give. McFadden did not have a good season this year, and he's the Raiders' best player. As he goes, so goes the Oakland Raiders. If McFadden isn't working, neither is the Raiders' offense, and so something had to change. And I'm pretty sure Reggie McKenzie went to Dennis Allen and said, look, I know that's your guy. You brought him here. But if he doesn't go, then you two might have to go. Because Darren McFadden is a Raider. He's a guy that we're going to build around. When the Raiders were any good, when they went 8-8, when they looked like a team that was threatening to win the division, Darren McFadden was one of the most explosive players in the National Football League. So you have to know that when the Raiders have some success, it's going to be because Darren McFadden is running the football successfully. And he's not a zone run blocking scheme guy. He's not one of these backs that's patient enough to wait, and when the hole opens up, he can cut sharply on a dime and go. He's a guy that they need to be blocking man on man, and when that hole opens up, he can just go. They need to be a downhill running power run blocking team. And so they're going to bring in someone that exemplifies that. And that's not what Greg Knapp was. He was a finesse guy. He was a zone blocking guy. And so wasn't going to work in Oakland. They had to get rid of him. So a lot of questions for the Raiders to answer. The offensive coordinator had to go because I don't think that what the Raiders were doing really works. And if for nothing else, I didn't feel like they utilized Marcel Reese good enough until the later stages of the season. I felt like they really underutilized Marcel Reese, and I feel like that's a guy on their team that they need to use more. They gave him a contract extension earlier in the season, which lets you know how high they think of him. He's a hybrid player. He's a fullback that played receiver in college, so he can catch. He has soft hands. He can run the football as a running back. And oh, by the way, he's a fullback, so if you put him in, he's a mismatch. Some safety or some linebacker is going to try to guard him one-on-one out in pass coverage. It's a mismatch. Marcel Reese is too athletic and too skilled to have that kind of matchup. It's a mismatch for him. And the Raiders needed to utilize that more, I thought. He was second on the team in rushing, second in receiving. And a large reason why was because they didn't have any threats anywhere else. Not that his numbers were overly impressive in that you could say, well, he was second in both of those categories. He was second because McFadden got hurt and Goodson got hurt. And they didn't have any running backs, so he had to run the football. And in receiving, didn't have any. I just told you, didn't have a number one receiver. So he was a guy that they threw the football to later on in the season. But I think they need to find ways, creative ways, to get him the football and exploit those mismatches when they put a safety, when they put a linebacker on him, because he's too athletic and too skilled for those guys to be able to keep up with him. So the Raiders have some stuff. McFadden, Marcel Reese. I think Carson Palmer is a strength for you right now. So you look at the talent on this team, and there's not a lot of it, but those are guys, McFadden, Reese, Carson Palmer. Defensively, you look at Tyvon Branch. I actually liked a lot of what Phillip Adams, a young corner that they have out there, was doing. You look at some of those pieces. Desmond Bryant, I think he's coming up as a free agent. That's someone that they need to re-sign on their defensive line. So there are some pieces there. I like what Philip Wheeler did this year at the linebacker position. These are guys that you can kind of say, all right, they're the best of the bunch. Not saying that they're really good, but they're the cream of this crop. And so you keep those guys, you move forward with them, and you see what you can build around guys like that. The Raiders average less than 4 yards a carry this year. That can't happen. The Raiders have to run the football, and they have to be successful at running the football in order for them to be a good team. And they were -7 in the turnover ratio. Again, when you turn it over and you don't get them back, and you give it up more than you get it, it's a recipe for disaster. Every week, when talking about football games, you could say the same thing. Stop the run, run the football. But one of the things you always say is always a common denominator in every game in the National Football League is win the turnover battle. Don't turn it over. Win the turnover battle. Force turnovers. Don't turn it over yourself. And the Raiders weren't that adept in that department. They turned it over more times than they were able to get turnovers, and that usually yields you losses in the National Football League. So that's going to do it for the Oakland Raiders and their lab follow-up. This team is going to be getting better slowly. 4-12 was right around where they needed to be with the amount of talent that they have on this roster this season. Next year, 6-10, 7-9 is where you want to be to see that growth. Now, I tell you what, you're going to have to start managing your money better in terms of free agents. And they're going to do that. Reggie McKenzie is going to make sure of it. Draft picks are going to have to be smarter and fit what you're trying to do in Oakland. Are you running a 3-4? Are you running a 4-3 defense? Figure it out. Get the personnel to fit what you're doing. Get a number one receiver. Start putting guys in their right place. Look at Denarius Moore. You look at Jacoby Ford. These are two guys that can't stay healthy, but they're so shifty. They're so dangerous. You put those guys in the slot. You put that guy in the second receiver position. You've got problems. You've got problems because these guys are so shifty. They're so athletic. They're so agile. It's hard for cornerbacks to keep up with them. You ask a cornerback, what's tougher? To defend a guy that's 6'4", that runs a 4.5 40 but physical, or a 5'11 jitterbug that moves and shifts and gets in and out of their break quickly? They'll tell you it's the smaller receiver. Those guys are nightmare matchups. They're nightmares. Wes Welker, why do you think he has 120 catches every season? He's a nightmare to guard because in a short space, his ability to move in short spaces and in quick bursts, unmatched in his league. You can't stay in front of a guy like that. And so for these two, Jacoby Ford and Denarius Moore, they can be problems in the National Football League. They just need to stay healthy. That's one. And number two, they need to be in their right lane. They need to be in their proper slots. And so you get a number one receiver, all those guys shift into where they're supposed to be. And so we'll see what the offseason holds for the Raiders, what they do with this third overall pick, what they do with their picks in general, what they do in free agency. I think that's going to be important. And how they start to shape and mold this roster. It's a 3-year process. That was year one. Year two is getting rid of the dead weight on your roster, starting to free up cap space so that you can go in for the kill in season 3. And that's where the Raiders are. They're in year 2 now, of rebuilding mode. This is a process, and hopefully the Raiders front office will realize that, not fire Dennis Allen, because there are going to be struggles. Stay the course. If you're not willing to make this a 5-year project, then you're in the wrong business. You have the wrong guys in place, and you're fooling yourself. So, I thank you for joining me on this Raiders follow-up. Tomorrow, we'll be chronicling the Philadelphia Eagles, as they are the number 4 pick in the draft. So, we'll be talking Philadelphia Eagles football tomorrow. And a lot to talk about there. They still don't have a head coach. So, we'll talk about the Eagles tomorrow. Thank you for joining me here on this program. I will see you tomorrow.
Oakland Raiders.